At 65, I spent $400,000 buying 15 acres of dense pine woods in northern Wisconsin, convinced that total silence was the only thing standing between me and true peace. 4 winters later, at minus 18 degrees, I found myself lying flat on my back in a 2-foot snowdrift with a sprained spine, watching the red taillights of an emergency vehicle struggle through 3 miles of unplowed gravel to reach my wife. The wind was howling through the black spruce trees with a sound like a heavy freight train. Inside our hand-hewn log cabin, 30 yards away across the frozen yard, my wife, Martha, was lying on the kitchen linoleum. She had slipped on a patch of black ice near the outdoor woodpile an hour earlier, dislocating her right hip. When I had tried to lift her from the floor, my lower back snapped with a sharp, sickening pop that drove me straight to my knees. The pain was immediate, white-hot, and completely paralyzing. I had managed to crawl on my hands and knees out to our old diesel tractor to start the snowblower attachment, desperate to clear our quarter-mile gravel driveway before the county rescue squad arrived. But the fuel line had gelled in the sub-zero chill. The engine coughed twice, shuddered violently, and died. When I tried to climb down from the steel step, my legs gave out completely, dumping me into the frozen drift beside the rear tire. Lying there in the snow, looking up at the indifferent, star-filled northern sky, I couldn't move my legs without blinding pain shooting up my spine. My mobile phone had died within minutes from the extreme cold. The nearest full-time neighbor lived 2 miles down a winding, narrow logging road that rarely saw a town plow. The nearest regional hospital with an orthopedic surgical trauma unit was 42 miles away in Duluth. For 38 years, I had worked as a senior structural building inspector and vocational technical teacher in Milwaukee. I knew load-bearing walls, structural steel stresses, and cold climate foundations down to the exact millimeter. I considered myself an indestructible, self-reliant man who could build, repair, or endure anything with 2 calloused hands and a toolbox. Yet there I was, 69 years old, freezing in my own front yard, utterly helpless, while the woman I had loved for 45 years suffered alone in the dark. In that freezing silence, a brutal truth hit me harder than the sub-zero winter wind. Nature did not care about my romantic retirement dreams. The tall pines didn't know my name, and the solitude I had spent a lifetime chasing was not spiritual enlightenment. It was dangerous, arrogant isolation. To understand how an intelligent man ends up freezing in the Northwoods, you have to look at the decades of urban noise that drove me there. For nearly 40 years, my daily life was an endless barrage of friction. I inspected noisy, chaotic, high-rise construction sites in downtown Milwaukee. I spent my days mediating shouting matches between belligerent drywall contractors, stressed electrical subcontractors, and impatient city planners. I sat in 2 hours of bumper-to-bumper interstate traffic every single day, listening to car horns, sirens, and engine brakes echo off concrete overpasses. I came home every evening with a dull headache and a persistent buzzing in my ears that never completely faded, even when the television was turned off. To cope with that relentless pressure, I built a private fantasy. Whenever work became unbearable, I would open glossy outdoor magazines and stare at photographs of rustic cedar cabins tucked beside quiet mountain lakes. I imagined a life where the only sound was the wind through the pines and the crackle of dry birch logs in a stone hearth. I dreamed of a place where nobody could ever knock on my door, hand me a clipboard, or ask me for a permit. I convinced myself of a dangerous falsehood. I told myself that modern society was inherently toxic, that people were nothing but noise and demands, and that true serenity could only be found where human civilization ended. When I reached 65 and my pension fully vested, I made my move. Martha was hesitant from the very beginning. She was a retired pediatric nurse who loved her neighborhood book club, her church choir, and the lively sidewalk cafes near our home in Milwaukee. Frank, 15 acres in the North Woods is an enormous amount of work, she warned me gently as we sat at our kitchen table looking at rural real estate listings. What happens when we get sick? What happens when the snow gets 5 feet deep? We don't know anyone up there. Martha, I'm in great shape. I brushed her concerns aside with stubborn pride. We'll have a whole house generator, a 4-wheel drive tractor, a heavy plow truck, and a pantry full of preserves. We'll be completely self-sufficient. We'll finally have real peace. I believed my own sales pitch. We sold our lovely suburban home, packed 45 years of memories into 2 massive moving vans, and drove 5 hours north into the deep woods. The first summer felt like an intoxicating dream come true. The log cabin sat on a high ridge overlooking 15 acres of towering red pines, hemlocks, and white birch. The air smelled of sweet pine needles and clean, rich earth. Every morning at 6, I would take my mug of black coffee out onto the cedar deck, watch the mist rise slowly off the forest floor, and listen to the songbirds greet the dawn. There were no traffic jams, no sirens, no neighbors mowing their lawns at 7 on a Saturday morning. I spent my days building raised cedar garden beds, splitting cords of oak firewood, and fishing for smallmouth bass in the clear river just down the road. I felt like a pioneer who had successfully conquered the modern world and reclaimed his masculine vitality. When friends from Milwaukee called to ask how retirement was going, I boasted about the silence. I told them they were fools for staying in the city. I truly believed I had uncovered the ultimate secret to growing old with dignity. Then, the first winter arrived, and after the winter, the endless, grinding reality of remote land maintenance set in. What those glossy outdoor magazines never tell you about the wilderness is that it is a full-time, unforgiving job that never takes a day off. A 15-acre property is not a peaceful retreat. It is an insatiable machine that constantly demands heavy, dangerous manual labor. In the spring, torrential rains washed out our steep gravel access road, requiring 10 tons of crushed stone that I had to shovel, spread, and grade by hand under the hot sun. In the summer, fallen timber choked the perimeter trails, and black flies and deer ticks were so thick that you couldn't step outside without a screened bug hat and heavy canvas pants. In the autumn, the steep roof needed constant sweeping to prevent wet pine needles from rotting the cedar shakes. And then came the real Wisconsin winters. Up north, winter is not a picturesque season of cozy holidays. It is a 6-month physical siege. Snow didn't fall in gentle, poetic flurries. It arrived in 2-foot blizzards that drifted 5 feet high across our quarter-mile driveway. Every major snowfall meant 3 to 4 hours of brutal operation on a freezing open-cab tractor. If a pine tree fell across the road during an ice storm, I had to bundle up in 3 layers, grab my heavy chainsaw, and cut our way out just so we could drive to town for groceries. By our 3rd winter in the woods, my body began sending unmistakable warning signals that I desperately tried to ignore. My knees throbbed with a dull ache after an hour on the tractor clutch. My right rotator cuff clicked and burned every time I lifted an 8-pound splitting maul. Getting out of bed in the morning required 10 minutes of sitting on the edge of the mattress, doing slow stretches just to stand up straight. I refused to admit it to Martha, but every morning when I looked out the frost-covered window at the snowy woods, I didn't feel inspired. I felt a cold knot of dread in the pit of my stomach. I was no longer enjoying the land. I had become an unpaid caretaker to a piece of wilderness that was slowly wearing me down. Worse than the physical strain was the psychological toll the isolation took on Martha. In Milwaukee, Martha was the beating heart of our community. She knew all the young mothers on our block, hosted weekly tea on the porch, and spent afternoons mentoring young nursing students. In the woods, her vibrant world had shrunk to 4 cedar walls and a television screen that frequently lost satellite signal whenever a snowstorm rolled in. She tried to be a good sport. She baked bread, knitted wool blankets, and watched the wild deer graze in the meadow. but I began noticing a quiet, hollow sadness creeping into her eyes. She missed the spontaneous afternoon coffee with friends. She missed browsing local thrift stores and library sales. She missed the simple, comforting sound of children laughing on a sidewalk under streetlights. Whenever our children and grandchildren drove up from Minneapolis and Milwaukee to visit, the tension in the house was undeniable. The drive was 6 hours long over narrow county highways. The kids loved the cabin for exactly 24 hours, roasting marshmallows over the fire pit and looking at the tall trees. But by Sunday morning, the grandchildren were bored, restless, and miserable from the lack of internet service and the swarms of wood ticks in the brush. Our son Mark took me aside during a visit in our third autumn at the cabin. We were standing near the woodpile, watching the clouds roll in from the west. "Dad, this place is beautiful, but it's an ordeal to get out here," Mark said, his voice laced with genuine concern. "If anything happens to you or Mom, we're 6 hours away." "You guys are pushing 70. You don't have a single neighbor within shouting distance to give you a hand if you fall." I felt my stubborn pride flare up instantly, hot and defensive. "Your mother and I can take care of ourselves, Mark," I snapped, tossing a split log onto the stack. "I've taken care of this family for 40 years. We don't need a babysitter, and we don't need city conveniences." Mark looked at me, shook his head sadly, and didn't press the issue. But after their car disappeared down the gravel drive, the silence that returned to the clearing didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt lonely, heavy, ominous. A simple trip to buy fresh milk, produce, or fill a prescription required a 45-minute drive each way over winding roads that turned into sheets of ice from November to April. Every routine dental cleaning or doctor's appointment became an exhausting, day-long logistical expedition. I had spent my entire adult life believing that peace meant removing other people from my existence. I was blind to the reality that when you remove all people, you also remove safety, connection, and the warm, vital fabric of shared human experience that sustains an older person's spirit. And then came that terrifying January night in the snowdrift. The County Volunteer Rescue Squad finally arrived nearly 2 hours after Martha took her fall. 4 young men in heavy winter gear had to carry stretchers, medical bags, and neck braces on foot through 2 feet of crusty snow because their 4-wheel drive ambulance couldn't climb our ice driveway. They stabilized Martha's dislocated hip with calm professionalism, wrapped me in heavy thermal blankets, and carefully carried us both down the hill to the waiting vehicle. That night, lying in the bright, sterile recovery ward of the hospital in Duluth, with an intravenous drip in my arm, and Martha sleeping softly in the bed next to mine, the last remnants of my stubborn pride evaporated. I watched the floor nurse come in every hour to check our vital signs. I watched the young orderly bring us warm broth and fresh water with a gentle smile. I listened to the orthopedic surgeon explain Martha's rehabilitation plan with patience and clarity. They were complete strangers, yet their skill, proximity, and human kindness were the only reasons my wife and I were alive, warm, and healing. 3 days later, when the physical therapist helped me stand up and walk to the 5th-floor hospital window, I looked out over the city below. Cars were moving smoothly along salted streets. People in winter coats were walking in and out of bakeries and pharmacies. City snowplows were clearing intersections with practiced, effortless efficiency. Streetlights cast a warm, golden glow across the sidewalk. I turned back to Martha, who was sitting up in bed with a physical therapy pillow supporting her hip. She looked pale and frail, but the fear in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet relief. "Martha," I said, my voice cracking with emotion as I took her hand, "I am so sorry. I dragged you out into the wilderness to chase an arrogant dream, and I almost cost us everything." Martha looked at me, squeezed my hand with surprising strength, and smiled with deep forgiveness. "Frank, it wasn't arrogant to want beauty and quiet," she said softly. "It was just the wrong season of our lives for it. We proved we could survive the woods. Now let's go somewhere where we can actually live. The moment we were discharged from the hospital, I didn't return to northern Wisconsin to shovel snow or fight the tractor engine. I called a local property management company to winterize the cabin, drain the pipes, and put the entire 15-acre parcel on the market. 6 months later, the closing papers were signed, and the land belonged to a younger hunting group. We used the proceeds to purchase a sunny, single-story craftsman townhome in a leafy, established neighborhood in Madison, Wisconsin. Our new home has a small front porch, a manageable 50-foot backyard with 2 raised garden beds, and smooth concrete sidewalks that connect to everything that matters. The local medical clinic is 4 minutes away by car. A bustling grocery store, a bakery, a hardware store, and a public library are a 10-minute flat walk down the block. When we first moved in, my old anxieties tried to whisper in my ear. I wondered if I would miss the wild deer, the towering hemlocks, and the total silence of the North Woods. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. My life truly began. 2 blocks from our new home, I discovered a community woodworking guild operated by the local senior center. The shop was filled with industrial-grade table saws, wood lathes, and heavy jointers that I hadn't used since I retired from teaching high school vocational arts. Within a month, I was volunteering every Tuesday and Thursday morning. I began teaching local high school apprentices, college students, and retired hobbyists how to cut traditional wood joints, sharpen hand planes, and build solid furniture safely. Working shoulder to shoulder with people of all ages who were eager to learn gave me back a sense of purpose and vitality that 15 acres of trees could never provide. I wasn't just doing mindless, exhausting physical maintenance anymore. I was passing down 4 decades of craftsmanship to the next generation. Martha blossomed almost overnight. She joined the neighborhood community garden club, began volunteering at the local children's library twice a week, and reconnected with a walking group of women her own age. Our front porch, which I had once worried was too close to the neighborhood sidewalk, became our favorite place in the world. Every morning at 6:30, Martha and I sit on our porch chairs with our morning coffee. We wave to young couples pushing baby strollers. We exchange morning pleasantries with our neighbor Tom as he walks his golden retriever. We chat with the mail carrier about the upcoming weekend weather. On weekends, our children and grandchildren visit without needing 3 weeks of complex planning or 6 hours of exhausting highway travel. They drive over for Sunday lunch, the grandkids ride their skateboards down our driveway, and we grill burgers in the backyard without worrying about tick bites, power outages, or frozen pipes. I am 71 years old now. Looking back on those 4 grueling years in the northern wilderness, I finally understand the profound mistake so many older adults make when planning their later years. When you are young and overwhelmed by the noise of building a career, paying a mortgage, and raising children, it is easy to mistake solitude for peace. You convince yourself that if you can just run away from the demands of society, you will find inner tranquility. But true peace is not the absence of human beings. True peace is having a community that holds you up when your own strength begins to fail. The wilderness is grand, majestic, and completely indifferent. It does not care if your back gives out, if your heating system dies in a blizzard, or if your heart skips a beat in the middle of the night. Nature offers beauty, but it cannot offer compassion, emergency medicine, or a caring neighbor across the fence. As you enter the winter of your life, real self-reliance does not mean proving you can survive alone in the woods like a pioneer. Real wisdom means having the humility to build a life surrounded by support, human connection, and accessible care before you desperately need it. Do not isolate yourself in the false name of peace. In the later chapters of life, human connection is not noise, it is survival, it is dignity, and it is the truest comfort you will ever know. Most mornings now, as the early sun rises over the rooftops of Madison, I sit on my front porch with a hot cup of black tea. Across the street, a bright yellow school bus stops with a hiss of air brakes, its red lights flashing, and a group of neighborhood kids climb aboard with their backpacks, laughing in the morning air. I smile, lean back in my chair, and take a sip. There is noise on this street. There are footsteps, car engines, dogs barking, and children laughing. And for the first time in my life, I know with absolute certainty that every single sound is proof that I am right where I belong. If you've ever dreamed of moving off the grid for retirement, or if you've had to make the difficult choice to move back closer to community and family as you've gotten older, I would love to read your story in the page. Comments below. Navigating that balance between personal space and necessary support is one of the greatest lessons of aging. And if this reflection brought a moment of clarity or comfort to your day, please like the video and consider subscribing to join our community for the next story. Until then, take good care of yourself and stay close to the people who keep you warm.